A former D.C. National Guard officer, Col Earl Matthews, accused two Army generals of lying under oath to the House Oversight Committee and the Defense Department Inspector General. Matthews recalls his experience serving under Commanding General of the D.C. National Guard, William Walker, on January 6 in a memo sent to the Select Committee. He disputes the testimony given by General Charles Flynn and Lieutenant General Walter Pyatt, calling them absolute and unmitigated liars. An analysis of the facts demonstrates that Pyatt, Flynn, and their Confederates repeatedly and deliberately made false statements under oath to absolve Army senior leaders of any responsibility in the delays on January 6. Pyatt and Flynn consistently and repeatedly misrepresented, understated, or misled the House Oversight Committee and the Inspector General regarding the capability, readiness, and motivation of the D.C. National Guard to respond on the afternoon of January 6. They falsely claimed that the D.C. National Guard did not have the training and resources to move quickly, to pivot from traffic control to civil disturbance operations. This was untrue. The Select Committee to investigate the January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol adopted another contempt resolution last week, this time against former DOJ official Jeffrey Clark. In late December 2020, Clark drafted a letter to Georgia election officials urging them to investigate voter fraud allegations in special legislative sessions and appoint different electors. But that wasn't the end of Clark's election interference. He ignored DOJ protocols to meet with President Trump to discuss ways to overturn Trump's election loss. Trump intended to fire acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and appoint Clark instead in January. A plan that was ultimately abandoned after top DOJ and White House officials threatened to resign. The Select Committee issued a subpoena for documents and testimony from Clark on October 15, 2021. He appeared for his scheduled deposition on November 5, when he refused to answer any questions.
As permitted by House rules, I considered Mr. Clark's objections and rejected them. The Select Committee provided him the opportunity to return to the deposition, and he refused to do so. I want to note that around 8 o'clock last evening, Mr. Clark's attorney sent a letter to the committee, another in a long series of long letters stating that Mr. Clark now intends to assert his Fifth Amendment privilege against incriminating himself in this process. He offers no specific basis for that assertion. He offers no fact that would allow the committee to consider it. Of course, Mr. Clark had the opportunity to assert this privilege and any other in response to questions we intended to ask him at the November 5th deposition. He declined to do so. He walked out. This is, in my view, a last-ditch attempt to delay the Select Committee's proceedings.
The lawyer who wrote a memo outlining how Pence could overturn the 2020 election, John Eastman, told the Select Committee that he will also plead the Fifth in response to a subpoena. Eastman has faced suggestions from multiple sources that he should be criminally investigated for his service. Eastman has a more than reasonable fear that any statements he makes pursuant to this subpoena will be used in an attempt to mount a criminal investigation against him. The fact that Clark and Eastman invoked the Fifth Amendment does not necessarily preclude the committee from soliciting information. An individual claiming the Fifth must explain the basis for their assertion in response to specific questions. The committee can also seek to grant them immunity, preventing prosecution in return for testimony and documents. The chief investigative counsel to the Select Committee slid a potential bombshell into the transcript of Clark's November 5 deposition, when he described what questions he wanted to ask. I also wanted to ask him about metadata in that draft letter. That indicates some involvement with the White House Communications Agency in the drafting or preparation of that letter. While only one sentence, it implies that the White House may have played a role in drafting Clark's letter pressuring Georgia officials to overturn the election. The letter was drafted just days before Trump called Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. During the infamous call, Trump directed Raffensperger to find 11,780 votes to flip the state from Biden to Trump. and it may not have been the White House's only involvement in the insurrection. The Rolling Stone obtained text messages documenting extensive interactions between January 6 rally organizers and the White House in the lead-up to January 6. Before taking a break over Thanksgiving, the Select Committee issued 10 new subpoenas to planners of Stop the Steal rallies and to extremists who took part in the insurrection. Dustin Stockton and his fiancée, Jennifer Lawrence, assisted the Kremers in organizing a series of rallies after the 2020 election. Both were reportedly in contact with Trump and White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and tried to warn officials of possible danger related to the January 6 march. Taylor Buttigieg solicited an unnamed nonprofit organization to conduct a social media and radio advertising campaign, encouraging attendance at the January 6 rally. Roger Stone spoke at extremist rallies on January 5 and was scheduled to appear at the Ellipse rally on the 6th. Alex Jones worked with a top Trump fundraiser to organize and fund the Ellipse rally on January 6. He marched with the crowd from Trump's speech to the Capitol building. Members of the Proud Boys called for violence leading up to January 6, and at least 34 individuals affiliated with the group have been indicted for their participation in the insurrection. Members of the Oath Keepers took part in numerous protests and marches to protest the 2020 election. 18 members were indicted by a federal grand jury for storming the Capitol on January 6. Robert Patrick Lewis is the leader of the First Amendment Praetorian, a far-right paramilitary group that provided security at multiple rallies leading up to January 6. We also learned of numerous people newly cooperating with the Select Committee. Former Pence Chief of Staff Mark Short was secretly subpoenaed a few weeks ago. One source told CNN the committee is getting significant cooperation with Team Pence, even if the committee has not openly discussed that. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger was interviewed for more than 4 hours last week, including about Trump's January phone call. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and former Michigan Director of Elections Chris Thomas were both interviewed in the last month. Thank you for watching. If this video has been at all helpful or informative, please consider supporting me on Patreon.